Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Story number 1. Children of Armageddon, written by Guncaster. It all started with an ice age, the one that ended some 10,000 years ago. His children, the Homo sapiens, had strayed too far from Yahweh's will. We knew it would happen. He promised free will to the reptilians as well. Yet he wiped their civilization off the face of the earth like so much dust. And so, we froze the planet. Small interventions in bright places, and the law of cause and effect did the rest. The apes soon went hungry and began dying off. Those that didn't starve, freezing to death. The cooling, however, took longer near the equator, and so some had enough time to prepare, to figure out that they could venture from their fires if they wore enough animal pelts. And so, through the permafrost, their hunters stalked, pursued, and slaughtered Yahweh's creations. Built homes of their mangled bodies, carved yet greater tools of murder of their desecrated bones and ivory, clothed themselves in mockeries of their mammoth's visage. Yahweh wasn't angry. He was furious. He demanded we send down the horsemen of the apocalypse. Famine, war, pestilence, and death. And so we did. We choked as clouds and dried out the rivers, rendered the soil barren and resources scarce. We forced the planet into a temporary ice age every single year. For what little remained, they warred amongst themselves, culled their population, learned, created new tools of war, new defenses, built greater fortresses and greater cities. From the grime and filth of war arose plagues, a myriad of diseases far beyond the worst ever meant for the beautiful earth. Some they adapted to. Their natural resilience proved greater than the more common of our plagues, but others destroyed their civilizations, sowed terror into the hearts of men, and fear they turned to fire once more. They burned their dead, isolated the sick. They raised themselves to the brink of death and rose from the ashes. And in death, the planet itself turned on them. The earth quaked, mountains spewed forth poisonous smoke and searing lava, and hurricanes tore down their creations. After a millennia upon millennia, the last human on earth was no more. For they had stripped the planet bare and spat in the face of Yahweh as their immortal bodies of steel, polymer, and unholy synthetic flesh. They had destroyed his creation and enslaved it with chains of industry and logic. In their arrogance, they built titanic machines with stars in their hearts and fled to the cosmos, corrupting lesser species along the way. What punishment could await them? Armageddon. End of story. Story number 2. The Downfall of the Rix, written by Runner 1. For hundreds of thousands of generations, the Rix ruled the galaxy. Their origin was long forgotten. Some said that they had been born out of the fires of the very sun that now formed the black hole at the center of the Milky Way. Whatever the true origin was, it was long lost to the sands of time. Over the last few million years, their empire had spread to nearly every inhabitable world in the galaxy. As their population had grown, they had searched for more and more remote worlds to inhabit. It did not matter to them if there was already sapient life on a planet. If it was suitable for colonization, the indigenous people were conquered and subjugated as slaves. If a world fought too hard for its survival, then the Rix would simply eradicate all life from orbit, then move in and make the world their own. But something had gone wrong a few years ago. The Rix began to lose contact with some of the most remote worlds. Ships were dispatched to see what had happened. Each and every ship had returned with the same story. They were dead. All of them. Each and every world that had lost contact had been wiped out. Everyone was dead of some unknown illness. At first, the Rix believed that something had come home with the returning ships as their crews began to also die. But soon, it became apparent that this was not the case. Messages started arriving that almost every planet in the Rix Empire was dead or dying. Their top scientists and doctors worked tirelessly, but no one could identify the origin of the virus that was killing them. It seemed as though every Rix on every planet in the galaxy was infected with the virus. Even worlds that had not been visited by other Rix in the last hundreds of years reported outbreaks of the same symptoms before going silent. Soon, there was only one Rix world that had still had life. In a medical facility, in one of the larger cities, the last remaining experts worked to avoid the seemingly inevitable. The Rix doctor looked in the mirror. The telltale sign was impossible to miss. On his upper mouth orifice, a large boil had formed. In a day or so, it would rupture and begin to drain pus. Death would be inevitable within a few hours more. The doctor lowered himself into a chair and held his head in his hands. "I have failed," he muttered under his breath. "Dr. Intubus," yelled the young intern. "I have it! I know what is killing everyone!" The older doctor lifted his head from his hands. "You've said that before." "But this time I'm sure. It's a human disease." "Human? What is that?" "They are, or rather were, a race that inhabited a world orbiting a yellow star in a very remote arm of the galaxy. The Rix invaded the world about 1,000 years ago. Instead of surrendering to a superior force, they put up a hopeless fight. Command eventually made the decision just to wipe them out instead of conquering them. They were eliminated, and the world was colonized." "What makes you so sure that you have the correct source?" "I've matched the symptoms, and then the virus itself, to one of their own medical databases. The humans called this herpes." "Everyone knows that the knowledge of any conquered race is saved for the benefit of the Rix Empire," replied the doctor. "How did you make this match when everyone else failed?" "Well, Dr. Intubus, their planet Earth, as they called it, was conquered so long ago, no one thought to look that far back in history for the source of the disease." "So, what is the cure?" "I'm afraid there is no cure." "Then you have the wrong disease, or it would have wiped out the humans." "No, sir. It was not fatal to them. Over half of their population lived with the virus dormant in their bodies their whole life." "Dormant?" "Yes, sir. The virus lies dormant along nerve pathways until some unknown influence triggers it." "Nerve pathways? But we Rix have nerve receptors in the skin on our hands that we touch with other Rix to communicate silently." "That is why everyone is infected, sir. Every time one of us has communicated silently with another Rix, we passed on the dormant virus." "That is insidious." "That's correct, Dr. Intubus. And based on my analysis of the virus, it has been spreading throughout the galaxy for at least 1,000 years. But that's not at all. I examined the virus at a genetic level. This virus has been modified somehow. It looks like the humans managed to modify the telomeres to greatly extend the dormant period. It is my opinion that the humans somehow learned that we have no resistance to this virus and modified it as a time-delayed genetic bomb. All I had to do was infect a single Rix with it. And wait." "But they are all dead. They are all died 1,000 years ago. What would be the benefit?" The intern thought for a moment before speaking. "Perhaps revenge?" As the intern spoke, the older doctor noticed that he too had a large boil developing near his mouth orifice. "My God, we are doomed as a race as soon as we set foot on that world." Halfway across the galaxy on a blue-green world orbiting a yellow sun, rubble and desert scrub brush concealed the former mouth of a long-forgotten cave that had been blasted shut 1,000 years earlier. Deep under this rubble, inside the cave once known as Carlsbad Cavern, an atomic battery still glowed with warmth. A nearby timer was counting down. At that moment, the timer reached 0. A relay clicked deep within a nearby electrical cabinet. Long, disused lights began to flicker on in the darkness. As the darkness of the cave was bathed in light, row after row of cryogenic pods could be seen lining the wall all the way around the giant room. The first cryogenic pod to the right of the cabinet was labeled 1. The last one on the left was labeled 1000. Equipment began to hum to life. Suddenly, there was a hiss, and with a metallic clang, the cover of the first cryogenic pod swung open. The eyes of a young man sleeping inside fluttered open, and he began to stir from his long sleep. End of Part 1. Story number 3. The Downfall of the Rix Pt.2. The humans are honored. For as long as anyone could remember, every race in the galaxy had feared the Rix. Everyone in the galaxy lived with the knowledge that at any moment a Rix battle fleet could appear in orbit around your world. When that happened, your life was over. If you were lucky, you would become slaves to the Rix. If you were unlucky, every sapient being on the planet would be eradicated and replaced with Rix. And there was nothing anyone in the galaxy could do about it. When your world was chosen for colonization by the Rix, the only thing you could do was run. If you were lucky, you and a few others from your world may live out your life on some friendly world that the Rix had not yet colonized. No one knew how many races that the Rix had eradicated over the millenniums, but they occupied hundreds of thousands of worlds around the galaxy. In the blink of a galactic eye, all that had changed. The Rix were dead, killed by some unknown virus that swept through their civilization like wind from the gods. When word began to spread across the cosmos that the Rix were really gone, the whole galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief. Across the galaxy, everyone wondered, was it really the wrath of the gods, or had someone managed to do this? For years, everyone avoided the dead Rix worlds out of fear that whatever killed them would prove to be just as deadly to other species. It was more than a decade before word began to spread that some outlaws had been using some of the dead Rix worlds as hiding places, and had not been infected. It was the Arcanans that finally got up the courage to actually land on the Rix homeworld. They were determined to discover the real source of the plagues that wiped out the Rix. Dr. Jertsu sat in front of a Rix computer console examining Rix medical records. His head hurt from deciphering the Rix language. It had taken weeks, but he and his team was closing in on the truth. "Dr. Jertsu, I have it," yelled his assistant from the next room. Dr. Jertsu was so deep in thought that he visibly jumped, turning over a beverage cup sitting next to the computer keyboard. "Selma, I've told you not to scream like that." As Dr. Jertsu finished his chastisement, the assistant came running into the room carrying a datapad. "Sorry, Doctor, but I was so excited that I couldn't help myself. I found the answer in the words of the Rix doctor himself." The young assistant handed a datapad to Dr. Jertsu. "See right here. It's the personal diary of a doctor in Tarbus, apparently written shortly before his death. According to his diary, he discovered that the disease was a genetically engineered virus. It was apparently created on a world that the Rix colonized more than 1,000 years ago. It was designed to lay dormant for nearly 1,000 years before activating. They gave plenty of opportunity to spread throughout the entire Rix Empire. By the time it finally activated, every Rix in the galaxy was infected. But in 1,000 years, there have been plenty of contact between the Rix and other races, even the Occanan," he said the doctor. "Why aren't we infected too? Why aren't we dead?" "Based on the early symptoms recorded by the Rix doctors, I believe we are infected," replied the assistant. "We are?" replied the doctor. "Yes, we call it mouth silt." "Mouth silt? Are you sure?" "Reasonably, sir. It appeared in almost every race in the galaxy a few years ago, around the time the Rix started dying off. Until now, its origin has been a mystery. But mouth silt is a relatively benign disease. Other than some oozing sores that go away after a few days, most races experience no long-term ill effects. Yes, replied the assistant, and the Rix doctor that recorded this believed that most of the individuals of the race that modified it also carried it most of their lives with no ill effects. I believe that this applies to most beings across the galaxy. If I am correct that this is mouth salt, and I believe I am, we too carry it now as a minor annoyance. The Rix, however, they had absolutely no resistance to the virus. Once it activated, their fate was sealed. Insidious, whispered the doctor under his breath as he handed the datapad back to his assistant. What was the race that we owe our everlasting gratitude called? The assistant touched the screen of the datapad. Human, Doctor. They were called humans, and their planet was called Earth. And get this, Doctor, they did not even have interstellar capability. They couldn't even leave their own star system, yet they managed to wipe out the Rix in every corner of the galaxy. Yes, Doctor, replied the assistant, and since they couldn't leave their own system, that means that none of them escaped. They all died 1,000 years ago. The doctor bowed his head. I would have liked to have thanked them. I wish they could have known what a service they did for the rest of the galaxy. Word of Dr. Jetsu's discovery quickly spread across the galaxy. It was the humans that had rid the galaxy of the hated Rix. Some more research by good Dr. Jetsu had even found an image of these long-dead humans. In a few years, there wasn't a capital city on a single planet in the galaxy that didn't have a gigantic statue of a human occupying a prominent spot in a public area. Most of them had some version of a plaque that greatly honored the long-lost humans who had rid the galaxy of the Rix. But despite ongoing years of research, no one had been able to identify the human homeworld, Earth. As millions of beings across the galaxy paid homage to these long-lost saviors of the galaxy, no one knew where they came from. As the years passed, the story of humans who had destroyed the Rix was told and retold in every form of public media on every world. The story of the savior humans had even eventually become bedtime stories told to children. In time, as stories do, the story of humans grew to an almost mythic status. As the stories grew, so did the perception of the humans. They even became revered on many worlds, almost on the level of gods. What no one in the galaxy knew was that 1,000 humans had survived. For 1,000 years, these 500 couples had been laying asleep in cryogenic pods deep underground in what was once New Mexico. While the rest of the galaxy was memorializing the human race, these 1,000 had been restarting human civilization. They were deciphering the left-behind Rix technology. They were also doing what couples do. In no short order, these 1,000 grew to 2, and then 3. In less than 100 years, Earth's population quadrupled. Even though they were the best and brightest and had access to dozens of Rix ships, the human race stayed on Earthbound for over 100 years. But eventually, the temptation was too great. A Rix starship had been refurbished, a small crew was formed, and over 1,100 years after the Rix had invaded, humans left the Earth for the stars. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my videos. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I would just quickly like to give thanks to our Tier 5 members: Elithia, Barky, Feudicuel, Meridian117, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Albarden Gusta, Savage Patch Papa, and Lord Azrakal.